Boom! Welcome to another exhilarating and exciting set of notes on human anatomy and physiology. This time we're talking about the skeletal system, folks. Awesome unit. Lots of fun, lots of hands-on stuff. Hopefully you get to come in and see it. Let's get rolling. You can find this pause button here. There you go. Okay, the skeletal system is divided into two subdivisions of the skeleton. All right, there's one called the axial skeleton. That includes the skull, the vertebrae, and the rib cage. And if you look to this picture over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that the axial skeleton is in this green-blue color. All right, skull, vertebrae, rib cage. That's the axial skeleton. The second part is called the appendicular skeleton. Appendicular. That includes the pelvic and pectoral girdles and limbs. So what's a girdle? Well, a girdle is where they attach, where bones attach. So check it out. The pelvic girdle is down here near the pelvis, right, where the limbs attach in an area. And the pectoral girdle is the chest area. So pectoral girdle includes up here where you have your limbs attached. So all the limbs are part of the appendicular skeleton, while the vertebrae is part of the axial skeleton. Other parts of the skeleton include bones, joints, cartilage, and ligaments. Now this unit is mostly on the bones. We do a little bit of the joints as well, but that's pretty much all we're going to cover in this unit. So what's the function of bones? Well, they support the body, right? Support and protection are their main two things that they do. They protect the soft organs. The skull and vertebrae protect the brain and spinal cord. The rib cage protects the thoracic cavity organs. Attached skeletal muscles allow movement, meaning that when muscles are attached to the bones, they create friction and angles in order to be able to move our bodies with our levers that are our limbs. Okay, our limbs create levers, we create friction and force, so we're able to move with the combination of both of those. So this right here is probably a short answer question on your next quiz. What is the function of bone? And you would list these things that you see here. Okay, here are additional functions of bone. One is store minerals and fats. All right, calcium and phosphorus are essential to bone development. You always heard about drinking milk because you need calcium to grow your bones. Well, that's accurate. So calcium and phosphorus are located in bones. A small amount must be present in the blood, and they're needed for the following things: neurons to transmit messages and muscle fibers to contract. This is another excellent point and really important to understand. That's why we need calcium and phosphorus in there. If you scroll down here to the bottom, it says blood cell formation is called hematopoiesis. Great word. Hematopoiesis, and it occurs within the bone marrow of the bone. So for this slide, the important portions are the minerals and fats and what they do, and hematopoiesis. Make sure you understand those 2 points. So a little bit more about bones of the human body. The adult skeleton is 206 bones, and many of you already know that. We reviewed that first day of class, actually. That was our question of the day. How many bones were there in the human body? And many of you knew it was 206, so good job. Two basic types of bone tissue. There's compact bone, which is dense, smooth, and homogeneous, meaning it makes up the same kind of bone all throughout it. And then there's spongy bone, small, needle-like pieces of bone, many open spaces, and they look a little jagged. And I'll show you a picture of one coming up. Okay, this is a cross-section blown up of the skull here. You can see it taken from the top of the skull here, and it's blown up down here. And the spongy bone looks like a sponge. That's why it's called spongy bone. It's got looks like air pockets in between it. That's so it's not so heavy. It's not so dense. And then you've got the compact bone underneath for tremendous protection. But you'll see that the spongy bone is kind of squished between two layers of compact bone here on our skull. If it wasn't like that and our skull was this thick and it was all compact bone, it'd be awfully heavy and hard for us to keep our head up. It'd be a lot of strain in our muscles. All right, bones are classified in a few different ways. And then I'll move this out of the way for you. They're classified on shape, right? And they're called long bones, short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones. And I'll give you a brief overview of that coming up. If you take a look at the skeleton here, there's a few examples labeled for you here. All right, the long bone would be an example, would be a humerus. Really, any limb bone is going to be a long bone. You got your humerus here. You can use your femur here. You can use your radius there. They're all like types of long bones. A irregular bone would be a vertebrae. And if you see them in here, they're not going to fit into the category long, flat, or short. They're going to be different. They'll be called irregular. And the flat bones look flat. Okay, right here, the sternum is one of them. Okay, the manubrium is above it, which is a cool one. The xiphoid process is going to be involved in that, but I'll show you that when we get to the skeleton. And then the short bones are going to be sesamoid shaped or kind of sesame seed looking. And you see one here on the talus. You'll also see one on the kneecap there, on the patella. And for our last slide here, we're going to talk a little about the formation of the human skeleton. Just kind of briefly in stages. All right, in the embryo, the skeleton is primarily hyaline cartilage. Right, and so they're compact in there. It'd be really tough if they were rigid bone in there. Plus, they would have to be able to grow with it and then be able to be pushed out. So you have to be able to bend a little bit. So it makes sense. In a young child, during development, much of this cartilage is replaced by bone. So as the child is born, it starts to develop more bone. And cartilage remains in isolated places. For example, in us, in a human, the tip of the nose is cartilage. Right? Parts of the ribs, joints, ears, all right? They all have cartilage involved in them. Flat bones form on fibrous membranes, and the fontanelle is something called the remnant of the fibrous membrane in the infant. The fontanelle is also known as the soft spot. All right, so that's our introduction to our skeletal system. Well, come back in. Let's talk about what we learned.